What's up, guys? We're back talking this time about Polania. Now, Polania is considered to be a strong faction. It's a faction I have a lot of respect for. We need to talk about the Polania trap, though, first and foremost. The Polania trap is, okay, I got a factory card, I picked up this encounter, and then I just started picking up every encounter I could possibly see. Now, you may think of this as you're abusing your faction ability, you're taking the most of your faction, but I've seen and I've tried doing this strategy, and it never works out. Like, say you have seaworthy, you can just pick up this faction, or this encounter, you can grab, pick up this encounter, etc. But if you do that, you're actually going to fall behind. Why is that? Well, you're not actually really getting fast stars. You're not setting yourself up to get multiple stars. You may get 1 star for doing so, but that's really not worth it all the time. And considering there's variance as to whether you even get a star with encounters, just try to pick up like 3 encounters on average a game, but don't really try to like go super ham taking like 5 to 6 encounters at the expense of slowing down your other stars. It's just not going to be worth it. Anyway, now that we covered the Polania trap, we can cover the Polania early game. There's multiple traps on Polania that you have to watch out for, but that's the prime trap. Your ability is good, but it's not that good. It's not going to win you the game by itself. Now let's talk about the early game. Well, it's a pretty nice starting zone. The village is annoyingly over here, but you do have a farm in your main territory, which is really nice, and you do have your wood in the main territory. First thing you want to look for when you have a forest tile on your initial starting squares is, can I build a mill? Let's say you have this board. Yes, you can. Take a trade action, take a produce action, then when you move, you can build a mill. Now, building a mill in the first 3 turns is going to allow you to get a ton of extra resources, which is huge for your early game. Not only is getting a mill that vital for your early game if you can, but actually doing so is going to let you down the line get effective buildings and actually complete your 4 buildings and get the most out of them, which is really, really nice. So can I get a mill is your first checklist thing in mind. If it costs 4 to do and you need to like double trade for it, probably not worth it. If you need to take like a bolster action to get your mill, then sometimes it's worth it, but sometimes it's not. Just keep in mind that you're not always going to get a mill. Okay, you've gone over, can I get a mill? And where do I get the mill? I'm still a bit torn. Generally I get the mill here, but sometimes I put the mill here. I'm really not 100% sure. I generally think that the principle of putting it on the wood is better, because this allows you to smooth out your early game, which we'll talk about why that's better in a second. So my principle right now, though I could be wrong, is you put your mill on the wood. You actually move off of the food and onto the village. The other thing you can take a look for is mechs, but there's no real mech action you can take that early that's actually going to be worth it. So don't take a look to try and pick up a speed mech so you can move on to the encounter immediately. Just take your move action. It's going to be annoying. You're going to move your character onto the wood because that has access to the riverblock tile that you have available to you. So moving onto the wood is strictly better than moving onto the food. And you're going to move off of the food and onto the village. Double produce, get up to 5 workers. If you really are feeling frisky, you can play an 8-worker game with certain board combinations. Seen that work and not work with Polania. And just general same checklist stuff, get your speed mech so you can move your workers onto both food and wood. And we talked about briefly in the Saxony video. If you haven't seen the Saxony video, okay, I moved my character once already. Why don't I just get my Riverwalk mech and get onto Steel? Well, we covered this with Saxony, and that is any good Saxon player, by the time you're really at this stage where you're considering your first mech and taking a Riverwalk mech so you can get onto Steel and start producing and getting your mechs out, is going to dive in with underpass and speed and take this territory from you if you ever produce on it. And since you're going to have 4 to 7 steel on here, it's just going to set your game back entirely. Since you don't have your speed mech, let's say you have this board in particular, and you're like, okay, I can actually afford to get up to 5 workers and then move on to this tile, and then if I produce, I'm only getting 1 steel here. Well, Saxony can still attack this. Why? Well, because since you only have your Riverwalk mech, they kick you back to here, then suddenly you have to like move them here, and you'll never have access to this tile, like ever, basically. You're going to need to deploy another mech and then go fight them on a tunnel, which is just a pain in the ass and generally not even worth it, because fighting Saxony on a tunnel is going to lose you a lot more than it gets you. So this is a vulnerable strategy. It's worth considering with this board in particular if you go 5 worker, just because they don't get a lot of resources for it. You're not going all in on this tile. But with almost every other tile where you can't immediately use the steel after producing, it's never ever ever worth it to start with your Riverwalk mech, because Saxony will love these resources. Also, generally, food is more important than steel. This is why we're getting our speed mech, is so instead of going on this tile, which is nice but not super important, we can actually distribute our workers onto food and onto wood. Now we either have our mill or don't at this point. Our next priority, after we get our speed mech, is going to be getting our mine. Mine is going to be essential for getting out onto the board. Since you only have wood in your starting area, 9 times out of 10 it's going to be easier to get a mine than it is to get a second mech. And that means that you put the mine here, and then you can move out onto the board wherever you so please onto any of these tunnels. You'll have completed the early game mobility checklist of having your speed mech and having either a mine or a second mech. The other choice is, if you don't go for a mine, which I recommend generally doing, is your character will be on here at some point. This is a pretty big priority for you, so try and actually get this move in. Well, you do get the move in with the speed mech, it's just slightly inefficient. So you move here along with distributing your workers, and if you can deploy a second mech instead of getting your mine, and you can get your lake mobility mech, which allows you to move immediately from here to here. Now I know I was talking about the Polania trap of spamming a factory action to pick up like 5 or 6 encounters. Well, it is true that taking nothing but move actions, like if you go factory then factory and then move just to pick up encounters, it is going to not allow you to win the game. It is also true that a factory action is huge for Polania to allow you to pick up like 3 encounters. So if you can pick up a second mech, you can go immediately here, from here, and then you can pick up this, or this, or this, or this, and you can take those basically when you're taking your factory action is good, which is going to be most of the time. You just don't want to do like factory action then move, then factory action then move. That's a mistake. So getting this factory action, if you get 2 mechs, is quite strong for your faction. So generally I like going speed and submerge with my first 2 mechs if it's super early. If not, I'll consider going speed into Riverwalk. That way I can move my character from here onto this encounter immediately. For instance, if red is already on the factory, which they can be at this point, they can get there faster than you can basically every game if they want to. Instead, get Riverwalk, get to this encounter, and then you can get to this encounter, and that's going to be your prime encounters for the game, besides if like this encounter or this encounter is still available, which it shouldn't be. So that covers mech ordering. Your Submerge is really powerful. It's probably one of the most powerful mechs in the game. Just being able to pop from here to here, or like here to here, is just insane mobility. Camaraderie. So there's a strategy in this game where after you're done producing, which happens in the mid to late game as you're transitioning from mid to late game, you no longer need resources to produce. This means that a lot of people are going to be tempted to stick like 4 of their workers on here because it allows them, without spreading too much, to secure the factory and get a bunch of territory for it. And suddenly everybody who's trying to keep popularity, which is probably going to be every player with the possible exception of Saxony, is not going to actually want to attack this. You are the counter to this strategy. This means that if somebody's trying to do that, you can get your camaraderie mech and you can kick them the fuck off the factory. And you can actually do this whenever you want because nobody else can kick them off the factory. In addition, this means that you are particularly good at doing this strategy. So once you're done producing, if you put 4 workers on here, suddenly nobody else has the real availability to attack this. If they have any popularity at all, they're giving up on getting tier 2, period, if they attack you, because they don't have this camaraderie mech. So yeah, keep that in mind. If you're done with production, you might just want to put a bunch of workers on here. Worker spread is still always good though, so don't give up worker spread to get all your workers on here, but if it's at all possible, it's pretty nice to do. With Polania, oftentimes you're getting 4 buildings and 4 enlists. Sometimes you're getting 4 mechs, but usually not. Usually you're getting 3 mechs, or 2 mechs. And sometimes you actually get mechs over buildings too. So you're getting 4 enlists, you're either getting 4 buildings or 4 mechs, sometimes both. You're getting combat power generally because you have enlists. And after that, it depends on your cards and fighting. Not too much more to say here. As we briefly talked about in the Saxony video, but I'm not going to assume you watched that video. Keep in mind that Saxony, with their underpass, speed, and riverwalk mech, can move immediately from here to here if there's no people on this tile, which means that if you leave resources unattended on here, they can swoop in and take them. This is the big reason why I've been reconsidering the mill on here, is because there's going to be resources here, and they're generally going to be unattended at a certain point in the game, which means Saxony might come in at some point if I put too many resources on here and take them and run away with them. As you mentioned, taking Riverwalk first and just moving like 4 to 7 workers onto this is too all in. And that's about it. Be careful with Saxony with these 2 tiles. That's really the only other advice I had. I've already said, but it's very, very clear. You're not going to have a fun time if you don't respect the Saxony player. And that's it. I hope you guys learned something, and I hope you guys take this advice into your games. Be back for Nords.